It's really a matter of showing their dominance.
India's great Chinese conundrum.
Nobody can contain it. Not the United States, not China, not anybody else.
Frenemies. This and more. Streaming on the world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
Hello and welcome. You are watching Business Plus here on News 9 Live. I'm Krishnakumar and I'm being joined by my colleague Karthik Malhotra. And ladies and gentlemen, at this hour, we have a piece of news that you need to know that's very important. The Digital India Bill. That's right. This is the bill that is going to govern everything that affects you, from fact-checking to misinformation to artificial intelligence and other things that affects your lives today and going forward as well. What will this bill be all about, and more importantly, will it be able to protect you, the consumer, from all that is happening in the world of technology that you are exposed to even without your own knowledge most of the time? Karthik Malhotra will be there, and we have some very special guests joining us on the broadcast as well. We have the founder of MeitY Now, Mr. Nikhil Pahwa, joining us, and also Mr. Amit Kumar Gupta, founder of FinTech Capital. But the point of the matter at this stage is, ladies and gentlemen, the Digital India Bill will be thrown open for public consultation in just a couple of weeks from now. It was supposed to be released, but then the government did do an outreach program through which it got feedback from experts across the country. The government reached out to Mumbai, Bengaluru and other cities and got some feedback. And that feedback led the government to believe that some changes need to be made for this Digital India Bill, which will eventually replace the IT Act of the year 2000. Because, ladies and gentlemen, since then, the levels of cyber crimes have only gone up and up and up. Karthik, that's very important, isn't it? That's the reason why the Digital India Bill is getting delayed and more feedback is being taken. Cyber crime is at an all-time high right now, Karthik.
Cyber crime linked to that, data protection, leakage of data, the powers vested with the big tech and potential exploitation of those powers. And who's at the receiving end? At the receiving end, as you mentioned, Krishna, it is us, the consumers. I think what is very important to note here is that the IT Act that we have is of the year 2000. We are talking about a time when .com was just about fledgling before the burst in the .com really happened. So we are talking about a 23-year-old act which governs organizations doing business in India using data, deploying technology and dealing with your life and my life on the digital space. Now, it's 23 years to that, and about time that a new bill, a new draft, a new legislation and a new regulation, and regulation is the key word here. Right. How much of it should be influenced by what the government wants, and how much of the regulation should accrue to what the citizens of India deserve. I think these are some of the issues that we should touch upon today.
Oh, absolutely. And to do that, Karthik, we're being joined by Mr. Nikhil Pahwa, founder MeitY Now joining us on the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Nikhil. We have Avisha also joining us. Just going to take this across to Nikhil first. Nikhil, talk to us quickly. Your first thoughts on this Digital India Bill. It will replace the IT Act. It will be a brand new act and a bill altogether. More specifically, they are taking this back to the drawing board because of things like fact-checking, misinformation, artificial intelligence.
Thanks. So the Digital India Act, the DIA is being called. Mr. Chandrasekhar has held several meetings and consultations on this. They've mostly been closed and private, but the presentation for that was available on MeitY's website. And one of the things that I noticed about what Mr. Chandrasekhar, and he said this in interviews as well, was that they will remove safe harbor protections for intermediaries. And he's asked, do we even need safe harbor now? It's a complex phrase, not many people understand it. But what safe harbor is that, if I'm putting something, if I'm saying something on your show, you are not liable for it. If I'm putting something on social media, the social media platform is not liable for it. I am. So if those protections are removed, the platform will be liable for it. And in that sense, the platform can't survive it. So if the safe harbor is removed, as what Mr. Chandrasekhar has been talking about for quite a while, basically the internet will not be able to survive this kind of a change. So we have to be very careful. The IT Act may be old. It was amended for the better in 2008. and the protections that it has given us are important for us to retain. So the principles should be the same
Right.
about having an internet which is open, global, competitive, accessible to all, and most importantly, support Startup India. Startup India will not survive this removal of safe harbor which Mr. Chandrasekhar has been talking about.
Right. Stay with us, Nikhil. Let me take this across to Avisha Gupta as well, partner of Luthra and Luthra Law Offices, joining us now. Avisha, thank you so much for taking time out. Quickly talk to us. There is the Digital Data Protection Bill as well, and now we have the Digital India Bill, both focusing on the same thing. There are no-go areas which this bill could have as far as the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies are concerned, specifically with regards to how companies process the data that they have from their customers, how they process it. Will they use, they should not be able to use artificial intelligence while processing the data, that kind of no-go areas.
Sure. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on. Regarding your question first on there being existing law on the subject, as well as draft legislations around digital data protection bill. There's also a draft telecom bill that is floating. How we see it and how Mr. Chandrasekhar in some of his consultation process has described this parallel sort of regulatory framing is in terms of an overarching framework of technology regulations that is being built around data protection bill as well as the telecom bill, also the policy around non-personal data that has been in and out for some time, along with this Digital India bill, is sort of an overarching framework of tech regulations that is being seen in totality. There could be areas of overlap between these bills, and there could be areas of overlap in existing laws vis-a-vis the Digital India bill, and that is something that definitely remains to be seen. But that happens with, in any form of regulation that is around technology, because technology by itself in its definition is converging quite a bit in many of the areas. So we will see certain overlaps, but I would say we should see this as a larger framework of technology regulations and Digital India bill forming one part of it.
Fair enough. Stay with us. Nikhil, I want to quickly ask you, just to, right at the top of my mind, this bill will cover, all consumer-facing businesses and enterprises which use artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. And there I have a question. That means all your OTT platforms and all your apps which provide you all kinds of goods and services, all of them will also be subject to regulation on how they use my data, as in your data, as in the consumer's data, with artificial intelligence.
And I think that's a good thing, but also they shouldn't be disallowed from using artificial intelligence. Look, if Netflix makes some recommendations to us for that, because you watched these shows, maybe you will like this one. And we see that in music as well. We see that in search results being optimized for what we want. It actually helps save us time. It helps us as consumers. So data processing using artificial intelligence has been a key part of making the right recommendations to us for decades now. And to remove that will only hurt our experience. So I think we need to be careful how we tread with artificial intelligence, because yes, there are concerns and dangers about, misuse of artificial intelligence, but we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. AI actually helps us
Fair enough, Nikhil.
Harms us right now.
Fair enough, Nikhil. The reason why I'm asking is that now, aren't we all sick and tired of a little bit of all the algorithm-ridden world that we live in? Literally all of our choices tend to be informed because of algorithms, Avisha, isn't it?
That's right. Which is why, and I see it in a positive light, at least the talk right now is around not regulating the technology itself, but focusing on harm around the artificial intelligence that can potentially cause. Yes, how do you go about defining harm in the first place and then regulating something like this is another question. But at least the going in position of coming up with a risk-based or a principle-based approach is something that is definitely welcome. But again, completely agree with Nikhil. Parts of AI and a large part of AI is actually beneficial for the consumers at large, and having a lens of harm is a good starting point to have, but definitely need to go much more beyond it and see essentially where regulation is needed, because it needs to be a risk-based approach. Not all artificial intelligence technology should be regulated similarly. and there needs to be factoring for size, there needs to be factoring for the extent and scale of risk involved, apart from factors like harm. So a good starting point, but definitely would love to see more coming in.
One thing I'd like to add over here.
All right, Nikhil, come in. You can come in.
I'd like to see a completely separate regulation for artificial intelligence, to be honest, because it is too vast, too complex, too nuanced a domain for it to be just included and have a one line creating a regulation or one paragraph or one clause regulating that space. That means that it won't.
Don't we have enough bills doing the rounds, Nikhil? That's why I started by asking. There's a digital data protection bill, there's a digital India bill, there's a telecom bill. Too many regulations possibly by the time we finish drafting all of these things.
I completely agree. In fact, that the data protection bill has now been in the works for 5 years. The government should have finished that off 2 years ago. I don't think we should suffer for the lack of poor decision making from a government's perspective, right? Poor policy making. They've basically just kept delaying the process. If the data protection bill doesn't get tabled this time, will it even pass before the elections is my question. So let's not, there are too many bills, but that's all because the process has been delayed so far. You've had 8 years of this government, almost 9 years of this government to pass some of these bills that are essential for Digital India. If you've delayed it, why is it that everything needs to be clubbed together? Not enough thought and attention being given to an important area like artificial intelligence. It needs to be given its own time, I think.
Nikhil, I have a question for you, and since you mentioned elections, is something that's been on top of my mind as well. Is there a dying hurry for the government to make sure that this bill is passed in the coming monsoon season, giving the government enough time to regulate fact-checking, to regulate misinformation, and potentially curb AI with the threat of deep fakes looming?
No, I honestly don't think so. There is no way that this bill is getting passed in the monsoon session. It first needs to be tabled. There needs to be a consultation process. Do
you think this bill will be drafted? Let me phrase it differently. Do you think this bill is drafted keeping election season in mind?
I think we already have regulations in place keeping election season in mind. Look at the fact-checking unit that has been set up under the IT rules. Look at the liability that is there for social media platforms, including criminal liability for an employee of a social media platform that's in place, because of which there is using accounts being taken down, using tweets being censored. So if you already have that censorship regime in place, there is nothing for deepfakes, I agree, but deepfakes would again be under misinformation, and it is possible for them to use fact-checking team to address the deepfakes issue as well. So you don't need a law because you already have these rules in place without a law supporting them. And I know that is unconstitutional the way they've gone about it, but they already have these tools which have already been using. So I don't think this bill is going to get tabled and passed. You might see more rules and regulations come in. You will see more deployment of these, like for example, websites can be censored, news articles can be censored under the IT rules 2020, even though there is now a stay order on that. But you will use the fact-checking mechanism to basically address those issues. I don't think we'll see this bill passed. Let's not fool ourselves. The data protection bill is probably the only one that will probably get passed. The telecom bill, again, no one's seen the new draft. There was only one draft, which was terrible, to be honest. And we haven't heard of it since then.
Right.
So the only one that, in my mind, is going to get passed is the data protection bill. That's it. I don't expect anything else to be passed.
Fair enough. Avisha, Nikhil, I'll get back to you as well. Avisha, my question here is that this time around, you had a government starting a consultation process, a feedback outreach process that began in the month of March, and then now it's going to be put for public consultation for another 2 weeks. Experts from across the big cities of the country have been consulted. It's a good way of going about bringing about a bill that's covering futuristic technologies at this stage when things are changing so quickly. We went from Chat GPT to GPT-3 in a matter of a month or so.
For sure, and interesting that you brought this up because I wanted to take this discussion beyond AI and bring it to the emerging tech that is there. Perhaps AI could be the backbone of all of these technologies, but
it's the headline grabber.
The way that they are being used are very different and very different in their application and form. So the point that is there is it's good to have this consultation process, specifically because it's anybody's guess as to what the country's technology framework or the use by consumers is going to look like in the next 5 years. And this is what comes up with emerging tech. It's emerging for a particular reason, because the kind of harms, the kind of benefits that come with it are really undefined. And unless we have this dedicated stakeholder consultation process, we cannot come up with a law which is meaningful or implementable in any form. So it's good to have this consultation process. But at the same time, what I would have liked rather was to also have some form of contours of the bill. Yes, the presentation was out there on the basis of which the consultation happened, but just those presentations with a few bullet points, perhaps we need more color than that to really comment upon and see it in the best light. And perhaps the public consultation process will give us that opportunity to deep dive into issues and give meaningful suggestions to come up with a law that is practical, implementable, and a balance between public interest and innovation.
Avisha, give us some examples of how these bills are passed globally, and what are the contours of the bills that you may have, through your legal framework, kept an eye on. What are the contours of such legislations and regulations globally?
So EU has been very active in regulating artificial intelligence, and of course, we've seen a lot of regulators react to how ChatGPT has been adopted by the world at large, with Italy coming up with its own concerns around privacy. So the way that globally regulators are looking at this is in terms of fitting the existing technology in the existing legal framework. For example, Italy basing all its concerns around ChatGPT basis their existing privacy law. And there are parts of the world which are coming up with enactments, like I said, EU around regulating this proactively rather than looking and falling back on the existing regulations. And what we need perhaps is the latter approach, having a dedicated framework. I'm really neutral to having a separate law or keeping it within the Digital India framework. But so long as the broad contours are defined and there's enough room and scope left for innovation to happen, it should be good. The way that regulators are looking at across world, and I think it's a right approach to take, is the risk-based approach around AI and the harm that it could cause. The severe the harm, the more stringent the ban around use of those technologies is, and then it keeps getting liberal with the level of risk getting reduced. So these sort of broad lenses around harm, risk-based approach, principle-based approach,
Sure.
they are all, I believe, good starting points.
Okay. Nikhil, let me get you in again. Now, you spoke about intermediaries being held responsible for the content published on their platforms. Now, remember, these are platforms. These are not content creators themselves. And this is where the big tech comes in. What does an act like this do for big tech to operate in a country like India?
So, look, I think it actually helps big tech if an act like this comes out and puts them under more regulation, because the cost of regulation will actually make it difficult for competition to come up against them. If you look at the EU's data protection bill, the GDPR, actually what happened as a function of that was that it cemented Google and Facebook's advertising business and killed a lot of small ad networks in the EU. So while the narrative around this is that it's going to hurt big tech and harm big tech, let's face it, they have the money to deal with these problems. It's the smaller players that get impacted. So we have to be very careful about these regulations, that they shouldn't hurt smaller players. They shouldn't be so harmful to the internet. Like removing safe harbor means that also big tech may not survive. Think of the millions of hours of video that is uploaded on YouTube every day. YouTube can't pass through or go through every video to see whether it violates any law or not. If it's held liable for it, YouTube will not survive. So we have to be very careful how we tread, because A, we want to protect the carriers of our free speech as well, because all of our free speech is carried by them today, right? And secondly, you also want to make sure the regulations aren't that stringent and that harmful that maybe they'll cost the big tech companies a few $100 million a year to deal with them over a 5-year period.
But it kills innovation.
It kills the smaller players. It kills the innovation. It kills competition for big tech. So be careful what you wish for. You just might get it, in that sense. We have to be, that's why these things needed more public consultation. Even with AI, there are other theories also about whether, you should look at it. It needs to be looked at differently from different angles. Like data protection and discrimination is one set of concerns. Copyright is a completely different issue, because if it's generating content, who owns the copyright to it?
Yeah.
It's also based on data that you and I may have generated online over the years.
Absolutely, which the
What
machine
are
has
our
learned and
rights over there?
repurposed and given new words and new flavor to it.
So in terms of AI also, there are multiple angles to look at, not just copyright, not just data protection. You can do harms based also. So it needs much more thinking. I don't think we should rush into regulating AI, and we should need to give it its own due amount of time, I think.
Just one more thing I wanted to ask you, Nikhil, about this, because this bill is also meant to sort of mitigate the new age offences, including possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material, improper and unauthorized digital use of government-issued identity cards. These are new age crimes that are shocking people to the point where we're numbed out reading about these instances on social media and elsewhere.
So I think the problem is not the law, the problem is the enforcement. Are you saying that identity theft is not illegal in this country? Of course it is. Are you saying that distribution of child sexual abuse material is not illegal in this country? Of course it is. You're just trying to say that a new law will solve the problem, whereas the problem is there's bad enforcement, there's improper enforcement. You don't have regulatory capacity, you don't have police capacity to enforce these laws that already exist. Let's take defamation and misinformation and disinformation, right? Are you saying that no laws exist in this country to address those issues? Of course they do. So while there is a theory that you need new laws for the internet, the fact is a crime is a crime is a crime. You need to be able to enforce it. You just don't have the enforcement capacity. So I wouldn't say, if you're hiding behind the fact that you need a new law and therefore you're not able to address these issues, I'm sorry, you had that opportunity. Even the Aadhaar Act, gives protections to consumers against misuse. So and that law was passed about 5 years ago. Where's the enforcement is my question. You just keep coming up with more laws and more laws, but if there's no enforcement, there's no point.
Fair enough. And Nikhil Pahwa, founder of MeitY, they are joining us with this perspective, and of course Abhishek Gupta from Luthra. And Luthra, we're continuing the show on a related topic, ladies and gentlemen. You might have seen that ad that came in a newspaper where a finfluencer, or an influencer who doles out financial advices and tips, was seen in an ad that also bore the emblem of G20 and the government of India, and questions were asked as to whether now these YouTube finfluencers and social media finance influencers are being endorsed by the government as the last source of checking facts when it comes to investing in financial markets and products. Now the question is, the debate around it has been so ferocious. Where will it lead to? Kartik Malhotra continues with us in the studio. Nikhil Pahwa also is with us in this discussion. Kartik, that ad raised a lot of questions, and there was a clarification as well from Mr. Rajesh Chandrasekhar, Minister for Electronics and Information Technology, where it is an ad by the platform for the influencer in question, but then there is the whole family of government approved registered investment advisors, or RIAs, who exist, and that's where the buck stops actually as far as people, consumers watching this is concerned. People are free to go watch any influencer that they feel like on any social media platform, but nobody, especially the government, will not be responsible for you if you were to face any kind of losses. But that thing completely changes if it's a registered investment advisor.
Right. So I think the government is very clear, and not just the government, even the Advertising Standard Council of India has come up with enough and more guidelines where it is very amply clarified, even by the RBI for that matter, very amply clarified that the government is going to heed any attention to your concerns regarding money you have invested and perhaps lost, as long as you have gone through a registered investment advisor. Many influencers, finfluencers, are not registered investment advisors or RIAs. I think the ruckus on social media was largely around the fact that, hey, there is this front page, full page ad, yesterday's papers, in fact, plastered with somebody who is allegedly a chartered accountant and not really a registered investment advisor. And yet it boasted of government logos, including the logo of MeitY and G20. Sources have confirmed to me that the ad was actually paid for by Google. The ad was not paid for by the government of India. It was issued in public interest. You had a big YouTube logo and then you had a few of these government
It is a
logos.
YouTube ad.
It's a YouTube ad paid for by Google,
Fair
paid
enough.
for, which of course, because of the popularity of the finfluencer, attracts attention of a lot of people, including us, and hence we are having this discussion.
Definitely.
But the government, I think the point really being that if a government logo has been used in an ad, the government is willy-nilly seen as an endorser of the campaign. And is the government then partnering with YouTube or Google, who paid for this ad, where you're calling for RIAs, where you're calling for fact-checking, where you're calling for killing misrepresentation or
Mis-selling.
misinformation or mis-selling, to have those logos portrayed in a manner that commoners get fooled that, hey, there is a finfluencer who may actually be somebody registered, and this initiative and this face is endorsed by the government of India. So let me increase my my exposure to that particular finfluencer and seek that advice and use it.
Right. Nikhil Pawar, founder of MeitY, continues to be with us. We're also being joined by Mr. Amit Kumar Gupta, founder FinTech Capital on the broadcast. Amit, thank you so much for joining us. Nikhil, I'll quickly take this across to Amit Kumar Gupta and then I'll bring this back to you. Amit, talk to us. There are financial influencers galore now who are already under a cloud for the kind of advice that they do dole out. And now you have this confusion as to who is a government-approved investment advisor that people can take to court if things were to go wrong, and who is an influencer if things were to go wrong is all on them.
Yeah, see, I think that was the main issue with that advertisement, because that endorsement gives an impression that the fin-influencers are the real experts. So, I know that Union IT Minister has tweeted later on that, one should be careful in putting out government logos. But merely tweeting that it is, that does not really absolve the government of, or even YouTube of that responsibility. Because on one hand, you have all these registered investment advisors who are qualified to give advice, and they're struggling actually to survive even because of the very strict SEBI regulations that restrict almost every aspect of the practice, especially after the recent advertising guidelines which have come. On the other hand, you have these influencers with absolutely zero responsibility towards the audience. They're making money by coming on these ads. And guess who is suffering the most? It's the common investor, the common person who cannot find quality advice at a reasonable price because he or she is getting a free advice on these social media channels. So my sense is actually, the SEBI should step in. They should, give out the regulations for influencers as early as possible.
Right.
The SEBI chief has already said that, something is cooking in the kitchen. But I think the more they delay these kind of regulations, more blow-ups we'll have of these kinds in the future. So my sense is that, SEBI should expedite the process of giving out the regulation.
Absolutely. Nikhil, therein lies the case. My question, one very simple, is that I keep seeing so many influencers in the financial influencer community, as much, if I say it's mushroomed infinitely. I've just lost count of the kind of financial influencers that exist on the internet. All financial influencers have made great fortunes. I'm not really sure even one of them watching them has made a decent fortune.
Again, we don't know, right? And they have a large community. Some of them actually dole out good advice. I think they have the right to do business just as anybody else, as long as they're not giving stock-specific advice, which is regulated by which is basically regulated by SEBI. But my question is, firstly, I'm also glad that Mr. Chandrasekhar has gone out and said that we should be more careful about using government logos. Go back to demonetization. If you remember, Paytm had put the Prime Minister's photo on the front page of many newspapers, and it seems it was without permission as well. So my question is, did YouTube take the ministry's permission before using their logo with this ad, and therefore did the ministry sign off on it? Did the G20 Secretariat sign off on it? And therefore, if they have signed off on it, they are effectively endorsing it. So Mr. Chandrasekhar's statement now needs to also come with a clarification about whether the government made a mistake about this or not, right?
Nikhil,
The other thing is,
my focus...
one small other point. Can the finfluencer also have bought this ad and run this ad by herself? And is there anything restricting her from doing this? Of course not. As long as they're not using official logos, right?
Right.
So I'm okay with and this is the newspaper that's why we're talking about it. But many influencers could also be running online campaigns, maybe using government logos as well. How is that process? How is that addressed as well, right? So there are a host of issues to address, but we have more questions than answers, and that's why we need clarification from the government about whether they approved of this ad or not.
Right. I have another question. I'm taking this opportunity, this particular issue that broke out because of this particular ad, to look at the entire sphere of financial influencers in this country. I mean, you're talking about the wealth gap increasing on a daily basis with every passing day, especially in a post-pandemic world with all the global trouble. People are finding it that much more difficult to get that retirement sum or secure their financial future. Huge financial concerns, and these financial influencers tend to become, after a point, like like astrologists or one of those kind of people who are sort of giving people hope that something will kind of happen, and and more they can tell people that come to me, I'll tell you how to make money. Anybody and everybody will go there. So my point is the larger regulation of financial influences per se, because if that community had great goodwill only, there wouldn't have been questions on this particular ad. There are questions on the goodwill of the financial influencer community per se, Nikhil.
I don't think we should paint everyone with the same brush, right? There are also influencers, financial influencers, who are teaching people for the first time in their lives the importance of building an asset base, of investing in stocks instead of just keeping their money in fixed deposits. Those are recommendations, and there's a mass sort of educational campaign that's of financial prudence, of investing smartly, that is happening. It's only when it comes to saying, when they're making recommendations where they have conflicts of interest, and let's say recommending stocks, etc., where perhaps the regulator needs to come in. But let's also not dismiss, that there are people who've done great service to those who otherwise would not have had access to this kind of financial literacy. So it's important for us to also acknowledge that you can't paint everyone with the same brush. And we need to regulate certain activities of influencers and not just necessarily say that they're all bad.
Okay, Amit, let me bring this debate to you now. And how does it work for the real registered investment advisors? Do you see more business coming to RIAs on the back of the education provided by influencers? Is there more curiosity they've been able to generate for financial products which are actually helping the RIA community?
No, I don't think so that's happening. In fact, the number of registered investment advisors have been actually on the decline, or at least they have not been growing. We have some one registered advisors for every 26,000 people.
Okay.
So my sense is that this whole concept of influencers is actually very deeply troubling, because a lot of them are getting away by calling them their content as only for educational purposes. A lot of them are freely providing investment advice. In fact, SEBI in the past, 1 year itself have, punished a lot of these people, put penalties on these people. PR Sundar being one of the recent examples, big example. And, on the other hand, you have people who are registered, who have done all the certifications. They are well qualified, they have experience, but they are not able to generate, income or sufficient income out of this business, only because the regulations are more on the registered side and not so much on the unregistered side.
Right.
And these people are, just recommending each and everything. So I agree with Nikhil that, you cannot paint everyone with the same brush, but at the same time, till you don't have a regulation which strictly bifurcates between what is allowed and what is not allowed
Yeah.
under the investment advice, I think we will keep on
Sure.
having these discussions going
Sure,
forward.
sure. So, Nikhil, bringing this back to our first debate on the Digital India Bill. Now, let's take this as an example. Now, if somebody were to listen to an influencer, see, if the influencer is a registered investment advisor, SEBI comes to your rescue. But in, let's say, the advent of the Digital India Bill, if an unregistered investment advisor or an influencer were to give you advice and you lost money, would the safe harbor clause being removed make YouTube accountable for the losses to an individual?
That depends on whether the person sues the influencer and YouTube together.
Let's assume
or not.
the
And if they
influencer
do,
is sued, but the platform is YouTube.
It is, of course, it's a possibility that might happen. That YouTube could be held liable for that, because you see what happens is, if you're not an intermediary and if you don't have these protections, then you're treated as a publisher. And so if you're treated as a publisher, that advice is coming from you as well. You're effectively endorsing it. So if in a newspaper someone publishes advice and someone follows their advice and loses money, can they sue the newspaper? It's a stretch, but the same rule will then apply to YouTube if that happens. And that's why, right? So it's not, look, any random person can say any random thing on YouTube, right? Sometimes that's beautiful. Sometimes that's beneficial. There are people who are giving health advice as well. Sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's bad. You need to be, so people have to, one, exercise caution about what they see and go and see a doctor. In the same way, they have to exercise caution and see an investment advisor. If they don't, it's their responsibility as well. I think people should also be treated as grown-ups, right? They are also a part of the decision making. Just because someone just wants to blame someone else because they blindly followed a recommendation shouldn't be the platform's problem. Right, it shouldn't be, to my mind, unless someone's actively misleading people and making money off it. I don't see why that should be even the advisor's problem.
But then how do you draw that line when you're drafting a bill and hoping that the bill would someday become an act? How do you draw that line where this much regulation is good regulation and beyond this is not in the purview of the platform?
Very simple. Very simple. The Ministry of Health should regulate health advisory. SEBI should be regulating investment advisory. The Digital India Bill should not be a solution for all problems, because it can never be. What you will end up, if it tries to be the solution to all problems, you'll end up with a khichdi that basically becomes a mess, and it will do more harm than good.
Amit, you agree to that?
But yeah, I was about to ask Amit, you began this discussion by talking about the fact that SEBI needs to expedite the rules and regulations, as far as doling out financial investment advice is concerned. Amit, so in that sense, forget the Digital India Bill. This is all about SEBI taking cognizance of all these people, because the issue here is the advice that they give relates to financial markets, stock markets, and financial products related to the stock markets.
Yes, and here, there is a direct impact on the money. So basically people are losing money. So I personally think that, a lot of financial influences, I don't want to get into other sectors, but especially financial influencers, they are operating in a gray area, and SEBI needs to bring in the checks and the balances to do that. Because in the post-COVID phase, we have seen so many influencers coming out and they're making videos along with the various brand deals, etc. And the conflict of interest is also not clear to it. And the unfortunate part is that we are at such a stage of our capital markets. We are only 5 to 7% where people are investing into the capital markets. If we don't, take decisions right now, then it's going to impact the growth of the capital markets also, because people are ultimately going to lose money. And, okay, they can complain to SEBI, but that process takes time and nobody is getting the money back for the investors. Right. So I think the decision also lies, what Nikhil was saying, on the investors also, that they need to be financially aware, they need to educate themselves, they need to cross-check credentials. Before taking any investment.
Krishna, I think we make too much noise about financial products and investments coming for financial products. But I think Nikhil is right. Yeah. It's also about healthcare. I would take it a step further. It is also about education.
Right.
An edtech player posting a video online and a child going to school understanding a particular concept of physics fails in his exam is equally, if not more devastating than making a wrong investment choice.
No, and definitely, and forcing a kid to learn coding.
Yeah, exactly,
you know.
exactly. So I think it's all pervasive, it is multifaceted, and finance influencing is just one small part of it.
Right.
And like Nikhil said, I think there is merit in exploring respective ministries to take charge of content across multiple platforms, not really keeping the onus squarely on the platform itself.
Fair enough. Nikhil, if I were to take this to you for one very simple question, yes, you know, people have to be more aware as to what is the information they're consuming, what is the source of the information, and act accordingly. But can there be simple little statutory warnings that can go specifically for the financial influencers set, because they're losing something that's the most crucial commodity in the entire world, and that is money. You know, health, what happens is that, you can take advice, it can be sound advice, but it might not agree with your own body. But when it comes to money, you lose access to even, correct your health or your child's school. You money lost, everything lost. You can't fix health, you can't fix anything else. So this becomes the first point of, first port of call to protect the consumers, that the consumer, the customer does not lose money. Can there be simple statutory warnings? If a financial influencer from a social media platform is doling out advice, he or she has been registered with the government with all the processes, due diligence, then TAPA. There's a TAPA on that financial influencer. You can take advice or not advice. That simple statutory warning, government approved or not government approved.
Or a simple verified take, what Twitter used to do earlier.
Yeah, like a verification badge. I was just about to say that.
I mean,
like a Twitter verification badge or a Insta verification badge.
But an unpaid one.
Government verification badge.
Semi-verified, RBI verified, Education Ministry verified, Health Ministry verified.
I think it's a really tricky thing to do, because, to be honest, there are different types of advice. That if I'm in financial influence and I'm saying invest in this share, I shouldn't be allowed to do that. SEBI should step in. But if I'm someone who say that, okay, you should, let's say, put 10% of your monthly income into fixed deposit, 10% your monthly income into index funds, and then you should maybe keep 5% aside for taking calculated bets, and that's all fine. So even when you look at education, if you're going to have to certify every piece of education or give a warning around it, frankly, we lose all the fantastic content that's available on YouTube, on Khan Academy, on Coursera. None of that is certified. But a lot of it is very, very useful for people to learn. So when it comes to kids, frankly, it's a responsibility of the parents. When it comes to financial investments, there's a role that SEBI has to play, but frankly, let grown-up be grown-ups and be accountable for their own mistakes, right? We need to make sure that investment advice is treated separately from financial advice. And so I frankly think that even if you're forcing everyone to give warnings at scale, how will you can do this for Indian players, but there are people who do it from outside the country, who do it globally. What will you do? You will ban the internet or make it on the internet. So let's be very careful about what we are recommending and the path that we're going down. We don't want to lose access to this wealth of knowledge that the internet also provides us. At the same time, what you have to teach people is to use their own heads, to use their own judgment.
Oh, well, Nikhil. I really want to teach that to people when they choose a movie, when they choose a song or a TV series.
I'm sorry, but I'm very worried about living in a nanny state where I'll be told what to eat, what not to eat, what to read, what not to read, where to invest, where not to invest. I don't want a nanny state, to be honest.
Neither do I. Nikhil, neither do I. My only concern is, we as children in this country get such little financial education that, literally we're all adults who land up on adulthood and suddenly realize the fact that we were never told that this was important. We were told to do good in studies. We were told to be good in sports, in other things. We were never told that, financial literacy, learning about how to invest in financial markets is going to be the most crucial thing that will shape your life eventually. So in a situation like that, even the most educated people can be misled by information, because you can go to a website, there can be an opinion piece, there can be a blog, and there can be an editorial piece. You'll have to look for which is the blog, which is the editorial piece, and which is the fact-based piece for you to process that information. So hence my concern here is to handle people with kid gloves, not necessarily be a nanny state, so to speak.
As every investor will tell you, losing money is a part of learning.
All right, well said. Very well said, Nikhil. And with that, I'm afraid we've completely run out of time over here. Nikhil Pava, founder of MeitY, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us over here. And of course, Mr. Amit Kumar Gupta, founder of FinTrack Capital. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us here on the show. But before we wrap things up, quickly, we have a good, very important update on the much-awaited merger of HDFC. 1st of July, paving the way for really one of the biggest mergers in the history of will meet on the 30th of June, that is this week, post the HDFC Bank merger. The shares of HDFC will start trading as HDFC Bank starting from the 13th of July next month. And the merged entity will be worth $168 billion. It is expected to grow on the back of synergies in operating models really between HDFC and HDFC Bank. And with that, I'm afraid we've completely run out of time here on this edition of Business Plus. I'm going to thank Karthik Malhotra, my colleague, who's been with us through this show. Thank you so much for joining us, Karthik. And with that, it's a wrap here from my side. This is Krishnakumar signing off. Keep it with News 9 Live.
BrahMos, stealthy, lethal, precise. It flies at